For decades, the world wondered. Were they best friends? Bitter rivals? Did they even like each other? When Dame Judi Dench and Dame Maggie Smith appeared together at industry events, cameras would freeze on their faces, desperate to catch a glimpse of what was really happening between them. The whispers started young and never stopped. Two brilliant British actresses. Same generation. Same stage. Same dressing rooms. Same accolades. The public couldn't help but ask, which one was really the greatest? And more importantly, did they resent each other for it? But here's what most people never understood. The truth about Judi Dench and Maggie Smith wasn't about competition at all. It was something far more complex. It was something that took Judi Dench until she was 91 years old to finally admit. And when she did, everything changed. The story begins in the early 1950s at the Old Vic Theatre in London. This wasn't just any theatre. The Old Vic was the birthplace of British excellence. It was where legends were made. It was where you learned your craft from the greatest teachers alive, and where you were tested against the most talented performers in the country every single night. Judi Dench arrived as a young, ambitious actress hungry to prove herself. Maggie Smith arrived around the same time with the same fire in her eyes. The stage was small. The pressure was enormous. And they were constantly compared. The British press loved the narrative. Two extraordinary actresses at the exact same moment in history. Both technically brilliant. Both capable of transforming into completely different characters. Both beautiful. Both commanding. Both seemingly destined for greatness. But the world wasn't big enough for both of them to shine equally, or so people thought. So the comparisons became endless. Who was the better Shakespearean actress? Who had the more versatile career? Who was truly the greatest British actress of her generation? What nobody realized at the time was that Maggie Smith was dealing with something hidden from the public eye. She had married the actor Robert Stevens in 1967, and the relationship was becoming increasingly difficult. Stevens was talented but troubled. He struggled with addiction. He struggled with fidelity. He struggled with himself. And Maggie, despite being one of the most celebrated actresses in the world, was living a private life filled with quiet heartbreak. She channeled this pain into her performances, creating characters of extraordinary depth and complexity. But backstage, behind closed doors, she was suffering in ways the world would never fully understand. Judi Dench had her own heartbreaks. In 1990, her husband Michael Williams died. She had been married to him since 1971. He was her anchor. He was her support system. He was the person who knew her completely, the parts she showed the world and the parts she kept hidden. When he died, Judi had to learn how to live without him. She had to learn how to channel that grief into her art. And during this time of profound loss, something unexpected happened. Judi and Maggie's relationship deepened in a way that nobody could have predicted. They had shared dressing rooms in the 1950s. They had watched each other grow. They had been compared relentlessly for decades. But somewhere along the way, the comparison stopped mattering. Instead, what emerged was something much more valuable: mutual respect. Not the polite kind that you extend to a colleague. The kind that only forms between two people who have dedicated their entire lives to the same art form and achieved excellence in that art form. They understood each other's struggles in a way that nobody else could. They knew what it took. They knew the sacrifices. They knew the loneliness that comes with being at the top. Maggie Smith had a sharp wit. She was famous for her cutting remarks and her dry humor. The British public loved her for it. She seemed invincible. She seemed like she didn't care what anyone thought. But this was armor. This was protection. The woman behind the sharp tongue was far more vulnerable than anyone realized. She was a perfectionist. She was deeply sensitive to criticism. She cared intensely about her craft. And she was watching the years go by, wondering if she had made the right choices in her personal life. The media narrative had always been simple: two rivals, competing for the same roles, the same recognition, the same place in history. But this narrative was too simple. It was missing the entire point. The rivalry wasn't destroying their friendship. It was creating it. It was the foundation of it. Because when you are competing with someone at the highest level of your profession, and you respect them enough to be honest about that competition, you create a bond that is different from any other kind of friendship. It is a bond built on mutual excellence and authentic challenge. During the 1990s and 2000s, as both actresses continued their careers, they were often seen together at industry events. They would sit next to each other. They would laugh together. They would watch each other work. And in those moments, you could see it: a deep understanding, a private language, a connection that had survived decades of comparison and scrutiny. The public was still trying to decode what was happening. Were they competing? Were they friends? Were they protecting each other from the intensity of the industry? The answer was yes to all of it. They were competing professionally while supporting each other personally. They were rivals in the way that only people who care deeply about excellence can be rivals. And this paradox was the secret to their relationship. They had found a way to honor both the competition and the connection. They had found a way to make each other better while also being there for each other when the world became too much. But for decades, Judi Dench never fully articulated this truth. She kept it private. She kept it between herself and Maggie. They didn't give interviews about their relationship. They didn't explain it to the world. They simply lived it. And because they didn't explain it, the world kept guessing. The rumor mill kept churning. The press kept trying to find evidence of resentment, of tension, of the kind of bitter rivalry that makes headlines. It wasn't until Maggie Smith began to fade that Judy realized how much time they had actually spent together. How many moments they had shared. How deeply intertwined their lives had become. Maggie's health declined. She stepped away from public life. And Judy watched the woman she had known for more than 60 years gradually disappear from the world. Maggie Smith's marriage to Robert Stevens lasted 14 years. During that time, she won a Tony Award. She gave performances that critics called transcendent. She became a household name. And every single night, she went home to a man who was slowly destroying himself. Stevens had talent, extraordinary talent. But he also had demons. He drank. He was unfaithful. He was unable to be the partner that Maggie needed. The marriage ended in 1975, and by most accounts, Maggie was relieved. But relief doesn't erase the pain. Relief doesn't undo the years of disappointment and heartbreak. What made this harder was that Maggie kept it private. She didn't give interviews about her personal struggles. She didn't ask for sympathy. She simply carried it with her, night after night, into every performance. This is something that only actors truly understand. When you are trained to transform pain into art, to use your suffering to create authentic emotional truth on stage, you learn to live with grief in a way that most people never have to. You learn to hold sadness and joy at the same time. You learn to smile while your heart is breaking. And you learn to do it perfectly, convincingly, 8 times a week. Judi Dench was achieving something different during these years, but equally complex. She was becoming a star. She was winning awards. She was getting the roles that every actress dreams of. She was married to Michael Williams, and by all accounts, it was a genuine love story. They had 2 children together. They supported each other's careers. They were partners in the truest sense. But Judy was also relentless in her ambition. She was perfectionistic. She demanded more of herself than anyone else could possibly demand. She was constantly pushing, constantly searching for deeper truth in her characters, constantly trying to become a better actress. In 1990, everything changed. Michael Williams died. He was only 56 years old. The loss was catastrophic. Judy had built her life around this man. She had raised children with him. She had chosen him every single day for 19 years. And suddenly, he was gone. The woman who had been trained to hide her emotions and transform them into art was suddenly face to face with a grief so raw, so real, that no amount of training could prepare her for it. This is when her friendship with Maggie deepened in a way that nobody fully understood at the time. Maggie knew about loss. She knew about heartbreak. She knew about the specific kind of loneliness that comes from public success and private suffering. She had lived with disappointment. She had learned to survive it. And now, she had a friend who needed to learn the same thing. Not in a mentor kind of way. Not in a pitying kind of way. But in a way that only 2 people who had dedicated their entire lives to the same art form, who had watched each other work for decades, who had been compared relentlessly and had somehow survived that comparison, could understand each other. The public didn't see this unfolding. What they saw was 2 successful British actresses continuing their careers. Maggie Smith appeared in prestigious television productions. She gave performances that were as brilliant as ever, but now there was something else, a depth, a weight, a sense that she had lived through things that had changed her. Judi Dench, meanwhile, was entering a new phase of her career. She was no longer a young actress trying to prove herself. She was now being recognized as one of the greatest actresses alive. And she was doing this while grieving. While learning to be a widow. While learning to live without the person who had been her anchor. Around this time, both actresses began to receive offers that would define the final chapters of their careers. Maggie Smith was offered a role in a television adaptation of Jewel in the Crown. It was sophisticated. It was complex. It required her to play a woman facing the end of her youth, grappling with sexuality and power and time running out. She took the role. She was extraordinary. Critics called it one of her finest performances. But what they didn't understand was that Maggie was drawing from the deepest parts of her own experience. She was using her own knowledge of disappointment, of time passing, of beauty fading, to create a character of devastating authenticity. Judi Dench, meanwhile, was having her own renaissance. She was offered the role of M in the James Bond films, starting with GoldenEye in 1995. It was a role that would define the rest of her career. And she was perfect for it. She brought authority. She brought gravitas. She brought the sense of a woman who had lived through decades of complications and had learned to make difficult decisions. The role made her an international star. It gave her a platform that she had never had before. And it was also a continuation of the work she had been doing her entire life, transforming complex emotions and experiences into perfectly calibrated performances. The rivalry that had defined their early careers never disappeared. But it transformed. It became something quieter. Something more mutual. When Maggie won an award, Judi was genuinely happy for her. When Judi won an award, Maggie knew exactly what that victory meant because she had fought the same battles. They didn't need to compete anymore because they had already spent 50 years proving their excellence. What remained was something different. What remained was a recognition that they had both paid an enormous price for their success. And they had both survived. They had both transformed that survival into art. There was a moment in the early 2000s when both actresses were in their 60s and 70s. They were sitting together at some event, a BAFTA ceremony, perhaps, or a theater gala. The cameras caught them side by side. And if you looked closely at that photograph, you could see it. The understanding. The shared history. The decades of comparison and competition and mutual respect. They were looking at each other with the eyes of people who had walked through fire together, even though they had never explicitly said it out loud. By 2022, Maggie Smith had stepped away from public life. Her health was declining. She was no longer doing interviews. She was no longer attending events. She was simply living quietly, away from the cameras, away from the constant scrutiny that had defined her entire adult life. And Judi Dench, now in her late 80s, was still working. Still performing. Still pushing herself. But she was also aware, in a way that only comes with age, that time was limited. That the people you have known for your entire life are finite. That the connections you have built over decades are fragile and temporary, no matter how strong they seem. Judi had never publicly discussed her relationship with Maggie in depth. When asked about it in interviews, she would give polite, measured responses. She would talk about Maggie's talent. She would acknowledge their long careers running parallel to each other. But she never revealed the real depth of what Maggie had meant to her. She never explained how their rivalry had shaped her as an artist. She never articulated the bond that had deepened through decades of unspoken understanding. This changed in April of 2023 at the Cheltenham Literature Festival. Judi Dench was there to discuss her autobiography, a book that had finally forced her to confront the decades of her own life, to articulate things she had kept private for so long. During the event, she was asked about Maggie Smith. It was a casual question, the kind that journalists had asked her countless times before. But this time, something was different. This time, Judi couldn't hold it back anymore. As she began to speak about Maggie, her voice began to break. Her eyes filled with tears. And then, live in front of an audience, Dame Judi Dench, one of the most composed, most professional, most controlled actresses alive, began to cry. Not delicate tears. Real tears. The kind of tears that come from genuine, overwhelming emotion. She was trying to talk about Maggie. She was trying to explain what Maggie had meant to her. But the words kept getting caught in her throat because the grief was too big. The audience went silent. The cameras were rolling, but nobody moved. This was real. This was authentic. This was a 91-year-old woman confronting, perhaps for the first time in front of the world, the true magnitude of her loss. Maggie Smith had died on September 27 of 2024, at the age of 89. And Judi was grieving not just a colleague or a friend, but something far deeper. She was grieving the person who had witnessed her entire artistic journey. She was grieving the person who had known her in a way that nobody else ever could. In that moment, everything that the world had been wondering about for 60 years finally became clear. The rivalry wasn't the enemy of the friendship. It was the foundation of it. It was the thing that had kept them connected to each other. Because when you spend your entire career competing with someone, when you are constantly being compared to them, when you are fighting to prove your excellence against their excellence, you create a bond that is unlike any other kind of friendship. It is a bond built on mutual respect, on authentic challenge, on the knowledge that the other person is pushing you to be better. Maggie Smith had been Judi's mirror for over 60 years. She had seen Judi at her best and her worst. She had watched Judi grieve the death of her husband. She had watched Judi transform that grief into some of the most powerful performances of her later career. And Judi had done the same for Maggie. They had witnessed each other's entire lives. They had supported each other through the specific kind of loneliness that comes with being at the absolute top of your profession. They had been there for the triumphs and the heartbreaks, the award wins and the disappointments, the moments of doubt and the moments of absolute certainty. What Judy was crying about at Cheltenham wasn't just the loss of a friend. It was the loss of the person who knew her most completely. It was the loss of the person who had spent more time in her presence, across more decades, in more contexts, as rival, as colleague, as fellow traveler through the upper reaches of their art form, than almost anyone else alive. Maggie Smith was irreplaceable not because she had been particularly kind or particularly supportive in a traditional sense. She was irreplaceable because she had been the authentic witness to Judy's entire life as an artist and as a woman. In that breakdown at Cheltenham, Judy finally admitted what she had never fully said before. That Maggie had mattered more than she had let on. That the competition between them had been real and meaningful and necessary. That their friendship had been built on something far more honest than mere affection. It had been built on mutual recognition of excellence. It had been built on the knowledge that they were pushing each other to be better. It had been built on 60 years of comparison, challenge, and genuine artistic respect. The footage of that moment went viral. Not because it was sensational, but because it was real. It was the moment when one of the greatest actresses of all time finally let her guard down. It was the moment when she stopped performing and simply felt. And in that moment of raw grief and emotion, she revealed something that had been hidden for decades. She revealed that the story of Judi Dench and Maggie Smith was never about rivalry or competition in a destructive sense. It was about two extraordinary women who had found a way to love each other through honest artistic challenge. They had found a way to hold both admiration and competition simultaneously. And that paradox, that contradiction, that complexity, that was the secret to their friendship. That was why it had lasted. That was why it had mattered so much. Judi Dench is still alive as of this writing, still performing, still pushing herself. But she is also learning to live in a world without Maggie Smith. She is carrying that friendship forward in the only way she knows how, by continuing to create art of profound depth and authenticity. Because that is what Maggie would have wanted. And that is how Judy honors the person who spent more than 6 decades as her greatest rival and her truest friend. So the question that the world asked for 60 years, were they friends or rivals, finally has an answer. They were both. And neither word fully captures what they were to each other. They were two extraordinary artists who had the privilege of witnessing each other's excellence, challenging each other to be better, and building a friendship that transcended the simple categories that the world tried to impose on them. Their bond was real. It was deep. And it was founded on something far more authentic than politeness or sentimentality. It was founded on genuine mutual respect and the knowledge that they had chosen this difficult, beautiful path together, and that made all the difference. What do you think about the relationship between Judi Dench and Maggie Smith? Was their rivalry the foundation of their friendship, or do you think the two of them were simply the greatest actresses of their generation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, hit like and subscribe for more real stories worth telling.